My name is Renata Voss, and I am 41 years old. Last spring I stood in a ballroom I had spent 9 months building from a blank contract into the most expensive night of the Hargrove Foundation's 30-year history, and my mother-in-law leaned across a round table set for 8 and told a woman I had never met that I did housekeeping. Not event production. Not company ownership. Housekeeping. She used that specific word. She said, "Renata does housekeeping work for venues. Corporate cleaning, that sort of thing. Very useful." And the woman nodded and moved on to the next topic, and that was that. Except for one detail, my mother-in-law did not account for. The gala had a live program. The live program had an MC. And 22 minutes into the evening, that MC stopped mid-sentence, looked out over 460 people, and said the name of the woman who built the room they were all sitting in. He said it clearly, the way people say things into microphones when they want to be understood. He said executive director. And the name he said was mine. Before I tell you everything, if you are new here, please hit like and subscribe right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more than I can explain. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this actually starts, because it does not start at the gala. It starts on a Sunday afternoon in a kitchen in Hartwell, Tennessee. The first time I ever sat across a table from Eleanor Voss and understood exactly what kind of woman she was going to be. Hartwell, Tennessee. Population a little over 9,000. 2 stoplights on the main road through town. A hardware store that had been in the same family since 1962. A diner called Patsy's where the coffee was too strong and the pie was worth the drive, and everybody who walked in got called honey by the woman at the counter whether she knew you or not. That was where Colt grew up. 3rd generation Hartwell. His grandfather had built houses in that county for 40 years. His father ran the lumberyard on Route 9. His mother, Eleanor, had taught Sunday school at the same church for 26 years and organized the women's auxiliary luncheon every April with the kind of efficiency that made people think she had been doing it since birth. I did not grow up in Hartwell. I grew up in Knoxville, in a rental apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like other people's cooking. My mother worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, office cleaning in the mornings and a restaurant hostess shift 4 nights a week. My father left when I was 7 and sent birthday cards for 3 years, and then stopped. My mother did not talk about him much. She was too busy to be bitter and too tired to be angry, and somehow managed to be neither most of the time. She was the most efficient person I have ever known. She could solve a problem while simultaneously cooking dinner and helping me with homework, and she never once made it look like she was struggling even when I know now that she was. I learned from watching her that the way you carry a heavy thing matters as much as the fact that you are carrying it. Knoxville in those years was a city that felt larger than it was because we moved through so little of it. Our neighborhood was 3 blocks by 4 blocks, and those blocks were the whole world on weekdays. Grocery store on the corner. A laundromat 2 buildings down where my mother did our washing on Sunday evenings while I sat on top of the folding table and did homework. A library 4 blocks north where I spent every Saturday from the time I was 9 until I was 16 because the library was free and the books were warm, and the librarian, a woman named Mrs. Aldridge, would suggest titles she thought I would like and then ask me the following Saturday what I had thought. She was the first adult outside of my mother who treated my opinion as something worth having. I was not a popular child. I was organized. There is a difference that becomes clearer the older you get, and the more you understand which one of those things actually matters. I organized the school fundraiser bake sale at 11 because nobody else had thought to make a chart. I organized the class trip at 13 because the teacher had the bus schedule wrong, and I had already cross-referenced it with 3 alternative routes. I won the regional science fair at 15 not because my project was the most creative, but because my documentation was the most thorough. My presentation had a table of contents. Nobody had a table of contents. I put myself through the University of Tennessee on a combination of academic scholarships, work study, and 2 part-time jobs I held simultaneously for 3 years. I studied hospitality management and event production. My mother thought that sounded like a fancy way of saying party planner. My advisor told me I had a natural gift for logistics, which was the most useful compliment anyone had ever paid me because logistics was the skill that actually paid. I graduated in the top 8% of my class, took a coordinator position at a mid-size event firm in Nashville, and spent 4 years learning every corner of the industry before I had enough contacts and enough savings to start my own operation. Those 4 years at the firm in Nashville were the education my degree pointed toward, but could not fully deliver. The firm ran about 60 events a year across corporate and nonprofit sectors. I started as a junior coordinator with a title that meant I carried things and confirmed things and assembled packets that other people presented.
I did not complain about that.
I paid attention instead. I watched how the senior producers built their timelines and where they built in buffer and where they did not. I watched which vendor relationships held under pressure and which ones fractured at the first complication. I watched the clients who got the best results and studied what those clients had in common, which was not budget. Budget helps, but it is not the variable that determines whether a night works. The variable is clarity. The clients who could tell you exactly what they needed the room to do were the clients whose event succeeded. The ones who said they wanted something elegant and memorable and could not say anything more specific than that were the ones who ended up disappointed regardless of how much they spent. I was made senior producer at the firm after 2.5 years, which was faster than anyone before me. My manager told me it was because I never missed a detail. I told him I missed details all the time, I just built systems that caught them before they became problems. He said that was the same thing. I said it really was not, but I thanked him anyway and took the title and the raise and kept going. Voss Event Group became mine 2 years after I married Colt. I kept his name on the company not as a tribute to him, but because it sounded established, and I liked the shape of it on business cards. Colt thought that was funny. He was right to think it was funny. He had a good sense of humor about things that other men would have made complicated. I met Colt at an industry conference in Nashville. He was not in events. He was in commercial construction and had been brought in by a venue development firm to give a presentation on structural considerations for temporary large-scale structures, which is a more interesting topic than it sounds when the person presenting it actually knows what they are talking about.
He did.
We talked for an hour at the reception afterward about load-bearing walls and speaker rig placement and the specific engineering problems that nobody thinks about until the ceiling is humming at the wrong frequency during a keynote. He called me 2 days later, and we had dinner that Friday. We got married 18 months after that at a venue I sourced with vendors I selected using a timeline I wrote myself because that is what I do, and doing it for my own wedding was not a burden. It was a pleasure. His mother was at the wedding. She smiled in all the photographs. She told 3 people during the reception that Colt had found himself a capable woman.
Capable.
Not wonderful. Not someone I am glad he chose.
Capable.
Like she was assessing inventory. I filed that word away. Not because it hurt. Because it told me something accurate. The first Sunday dinner happened 6 weeks after the wedding. Eleanor's house on Birchwood Lane. A craftsman bungalow with a garden that was immaculate in a way that suggested Eleanor found weeds personally offensive. She had cooked a pot roast. The table was set with cloth napkins. There were 3 other couples, Colt's sister Darcy and her husband, his cousin Webb and Webb's wife, and a family friend named Gerald who had known the Voss family for 40 years and spoke about them the way people speak about institutions they are proud to be associated with. Eleanor asked me early in the meal what I was doing professionally. I told her, event production and management. My own firm, currently 3 full-time staff and growing. We handled corporate conferences, nonprofit galas, product launches. The work I was most proud of was large-scale fundraising events, the kind where the room had to perform a specific emotional job for several hours and then ask 500 people to open their wallets. Eleanor listened. She nodded in a way that meant she was waiting for me to finish rather than actually engaging with what I was saying. When I stopped, she said, "So decorating events. You do the decorating side of it." I said it was more comprehensive than that. I said we managed the full production from venue contracts through breakdown. I said the decorating component was maybe 15% of the actual work. She said, "Oh, but that is the fun part, isn't it? The flowers and the linens and making everything look pretty." Her voice had a warmth to it that was doing a different job than warmth usually does. It was the kind of warmth that keeps you from objecting, because objecting would make you seem humorless. She moved on to asking Darcy about her children before I had figured out whether to push back or let it go. I let it go. First dinner. New family. Pick your battles. I told Colt in the car on the way home what she had said. He sighed the specific sigh of a man who loved his mother and had also been witnessing her behavior his entire life. He said, "She does not mean it how it sounds." I said, "I know." I said, "I just want you to understand that I noticed." He reached over and squeezed my hand. I believed he heard me. Over the next 3 years, Eleanor's understanding of my work did not evolve. It did not stall accidentally. It stalled on purpose, through a series of small deliberate redirections every time the subject came up. When Colt mentioned the firm had landed a new contract, Eleanor would ask how the food had been at the event. When I brought up a difficult logistics problem we had solved, she would change the subject to Darcy's children or Gerald's garden or the women's auxiliary luncheon she was planning. When new people joined a family gathering and asked what I did, Eleanor would answer before I could. "She does event work," she would say. "Venue services. That kind of thing. Venue services." Like I ran a janitorial operation. I want to be precise about this because the precision matters. Eleanor never said anything I could point to directly and call a lie.
She shaded.
She summarized in ways that were technically adjacent to true while being factually empty. She reduced a company with 11 employees and an annual revenue in the high six figures to venue services and that kind of thing, and she did it so smoothly and so consistently that I began to understand she had decided on that framing a long time ago and was not going to revise it regardless of evidence. Year 1 of the marriage. Easter dinner, Birchwood Lane. A surgeon named Dr. Hadley and his wife were at the table, friends of the family, first time I had met them. Dr. Hadley asked what I did. Eleanor said, "Renata works in events," before I could open my mouth. He smiled politely and asked Colt about his construction business. I sat with my lamb and my mint jelly and let it happen. Year 1, Thanksgiving. Colt's grandmother's 90th birthday celebration at a restaurant downtown, a table of 16. The woman sitting to my left asked the table who had done the flowers at the restaurant. Eleanor, seated 4 people away, called across the table that Renata would know. "She works with that sort of thing." The sort of thing. 7 syllables. I smiled at the woman to my left and told her I did not have information on that particular florist, but I could make a recommendation if she was looking for someone good. Year 2, Christmas. A neighbor of Eleanor's named Phyllis was at the holiday party. Phyllis asked Eleanor what Colt's wife did for work. Eleanor said, "Oh, Renata does housekeeping for corporate clients. She freshens up venues before big events." Very necessary work. I was standing 6 feet away holding a glass of cider. I had just finalized a contract the previous week worth $280,000. I took a sip of my cider. I set it down. I went and talked to Benton about the weather. I want to be clear about why I did not correct her at these moments. Not because I lacked the confidence. Not because I was afraid of a confrontation. Because I had watched Eleanor operate for 2 years, and I understood her specific skill. She was gifted at making the person who corrects her look difficult. She would say, "Oh, I must have explained it poorly. I just meant she works so hard at all the setup side of things. Isn't that right, Renata?" And then the moment would belong to her again, and I would have spent social capital I could not recover in a single dinner. She had been playing this game since before I was born. I was not going to win it at a Christmas party. What I could win was the work. So I went back to the work. Colt's sister Darcy pulled me aside at Easter of year 2. We were in the kitchen, and everyone else was in the backyard. She said, "For what it is worth, I know what you actually do." She said her friend Meredith had attended a conference my firm produced the previous fall and had come home talking about how extraordinary the night had been. She said, "Mom is not going to change, Renata. I just wanted you to know that not everybody in this family is standing behind her on this one." I thanked her. I meant it. Darcy was 10 years older than Colt and had spent a lifetime in Eleanor's orbit and had figured out very early that the most useful thing you could do inside that orbit was be honest with the people who deserved it. She was honest with me that day, and I have not forgotten it. Colt had his own version of this conversation with me probably 6 times across those 3 years. He would defend me to Eleanor, and Eleanor would nod and agree, and then do the exact same thing at the next gathering. He was not ineffective. He was outmatched. Eleanor had been managing conversations in that family for 60 years, and she was very, very good at it. She did not argue with Colt's corrections. She absorbed them and ignored them and continued, which is harder to fight than open disagreement because there is nothing to push against. I did not bring the work up at family dinners anymore. Not because I was ashamed of it. Because I had realized that bringing it up was giving Eleanor a target, and Eleanor was a precise shot. The less I said, the less she could reduce. I let the work exist somewhere Eleanor could not touch it, which was in the actual world, where it was happening at full scale whether she acknowledged it or not. By year 3, the firm had 11 full-time employees and 2 part-time contractors. We had produced events in 7 states. We had a client retention rate of 91% over 5 years, which in the events industry is the kind of number that people in the industry whistle at when you say it out loud. Our largest single contract to that point had been a pharmaceutical company's national sales conference, 1,800 attendees, 4 days, a production budget that had more zeros in it than I had earned in my first 5 years combined. Eleanor described this to Colt's cousin Webb as Renata's little party business. She said it the same week the pharmaceutical client renewed their annual contract for the 3rd consecutive year. The thing I kept coming back to was not the dismissal itself. It was what the dismissal required of her. To maintain the position that I ran a housekeeping operation, Eleanor had to actively ignore information. Colt brought it to her. Darcy brought it to her. The firm's name was findable. Our website listed clients and testimonials and event histories. She was not uninformed. She was committed. There is a particular kind of stubbornness that is not about ignorance but about the story. Eleanor had a story about who her son had married, and that story had a shape, and I did not fit the shape, and she was not going to revise the story just because reality kept presenting evidence to the contrary. I understood this. I did not respect it, but I understood it, and I kept working. The Hargrove Foundation call came on a Tuesday in March. I was in the office reviewing vendor renewal quotes, and my office manager Petra knocked and said there was someone named Clifton Hargrove on the line, and he had asked specifically for me by name. Clifton Hargrove was 63, third-generation family money, and the executive chairman of the Hargrove Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to pediatric cardiac research that had been operating for 30 years and raising funds with a gala every November since its founding. Their previous production firm had held the contract for 11 years. Clifton told me in the first 5 minutes of the call that the previous firm had become comfortable, which was the polite word he chose. He said comfortable in a way that clearly meant something closer to complacent. He said the foundation's annual gala needed to grow, not just in dollars raised but in presence, in weight. He said he wanted the night to feel like an event that mattered, not like a dinner with a slideshow attached. He had been given my name by a foundation board member who had attended a gala my firm produced for a children's hospital the previous spring. He had done his own research after that. He said he had spoken to 4 of our previous clients. I asked which ones. He named them. All 4 were among the accounts I was proudest of. He said he wanted to meet the following week. I confirmed the meeting and hung up and sat at my desk for approximately 30 seconds before I opened a new project folder on my computer and started a document. The meeting was 2 hours. I brought Petra and my senior production manager, a woman named Jo who had come up through broadcast television and thought about live events with a structural precision that was different from almost everyone else in the industry. Clifton brought his director of development and 2 board members. We talked about the foundation's history, their donor base, the profile of their room, what they wanted the night to feel like emotionally and logistically. I asked questions for the first 40 minutes and spoke for maybe 20. Jo laid out the production framework. Petra walked through the budget architecture. Clifton said at the end of the meeting that he had interviewed 3 firms. He said he would have a decision by the end of the week. He called on Thursday afternoon. He said the decision was not difficult. He said he wanted to talk about the contract. I signed the Hargrove Foundation Gala contract on a Friday morning in April. Total production value of $380,000. The event was scheduled for the 2nd Saturday of November. I had 7 months. I did not tell Eleanor. Colt wanted to tell his family. Not a show-off, just because it was the largest contract the firm had ever signed and he was proud, and he is a person who shares things he is proud of with the people he loves. I told him to wait.
He asked why.
I said because I want to let the night speak before anyone can have an opinion about it. He looked at me for a moment and then he nodded because after 4 years of marriage he understood that when I say I have a reason, I have a reason. The 7 months between the contract signing and the gala were the most intensive production period I had ever run. I will give you the architecture of it because I want you to understand what event work actually is under the venue services and the decorating the pretty things and all of Eleanor's language. April was research and concept. I spent 4 weeks studying the foundation's history, their major donors, their board composition, their previous events, and the specific emotional story they wanted the night to tell. Pediatric cardiac research. Children's hearts. That is not an abstract cause, and it cannot be treated like one. The room had to hold that weight and still ask people to open their wallets, and those two things have to be balanced precisely, or the night collapses into either a grief exercise or a sales pitch, and neither one works. May was venue and vendor selection. I pulled 14 venue options, assessed each one against our production requirements, narrated the shortlist down to 3, and made a final recommendation to Clifton based on structural capacity, load-in access, proximity to the donor base, and kitchen infrastructure. He approved in 48 hours. Vendor contracts followed: catering, floral, lighting design, AV production, photography, ballet, security, a live string ensemble for the reception hour, and a corporate audiovisual team for the program. June through August was billed. Timeline construction. Run of show document. Seating architecture. Donor recognition sequencing. Catering menu collaboration. Stage design. Technical writer review for the keynote speaker, a nationally recognized pediatric cardiologist named Dr. Amara Osei, who is flying in from Johns Hopkins and whose team had requirements I spent 2 weeks negotiating into our production plan. Budget tracking across 22 line items. Vendor coordination calls 3 times a week. September was refinement and the first site visits. I walked the venue 3 times in September. Once alone, once with Joe and the lighting designer, once with the catering team and the venue's events director. Each walk revealed something the previous one had not. The third walk was the one that identified the sightline problem in the right rear section, which I logged and scheduled for resolution during the final setup week. October was full-scale rehearsal planning, the final run of show locked and distributed, catering tasting with Clifton and 2 board members present, a full walkthrough with the AV team, and a table assignment process involving 460 guests that required more precision than most people would believe. Table assignments at a gala of this scale are not decoration. They are strategy. Donor relationships, board dynamics, major gift prospects seated in proximity to foundation leadership without it looking arranged. Spouse preferences, accessibility requirements, the specific social geometries of people who give large amounts of money and have opinions about who they sit next to. I spent 11 hours on the seating chart across 2 sessions. Petra thought I was being excessive. I told her to look at it again after the event when the major gift officer reported on which conversations happened at which tables. She looked at it again after the event. November 1st through November 14th was the final approach. The week of the event, I averaged 4 hours of sleep a night. Not because I was disorganized, because the final week of a major production is always this way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or running smaller events than they think they are. The night before the gala, I walked the venue alone after the crew had finished the initial setup. 4:30 in the afternoon, the room was 80% built. Tables dressed. Lighting rig in place, not yet programmed. Stage constructed, microphone positions marked with tape. I walked every table, every service station, every corner. I checked the sight lines from the back of the room to the stage. I checked the load-bearing points on the lighting truss. I checked the kitchen pass-through timing with the catering team. I have done this before every major event since my 2nd year in the industry. Not because I do not trust my team. Because this is my name, and this is what my name means, and the only way to protect it is to see everything yourself the night before and fix what needs fixing while you still have time. There was one thing to fix. The centerpiece height on tables 11 through 16 was going to obstruct the sight line to the stage screens from the back right section of the room. I called the floral team, and we lowered them by 4 inches across those tables that evening. Nobody at the event would ever know that adjustment happened. That is the point. That is the whole point. Eleanor and Clifton Hargrove knew each other. I found out about this 8 days before the gala, when Colt mentioned a dinner that his mother had been invited by someone on the foundation's board. He mentioned it casually, the way you mention something you assume is already known. I set down my fork. I said, "Who on the board?" He said a woman named Sylvia Crane. Sylvia Crane was a longtime Hargrove board member and a prominent donor and, as it turned out, a friend of Eleanor's from a civic committee they had both served on for several years. I looked at Colt.
He looked at me.
He said, "Should I call Mom and have her decline?" I thought about it for 3 seconds. I said no. He said, "Renata." I said, "Colt, let it go." Because here is what I understood in that moment. I had been building this night for 7 months. I had built it for 460 people who were going to walk into a room that was going to do something to them, something specific and intentional that I had designed. Eleanor was going to be one of those 460 people. And she was going to sit in a chair and watch the night happen around her the same as everyone else. I had not engineered this. I had not planned it. But I was not going to prevent it either. The day of the gala. I arrived at the venue at 1:45 in the afternoon. Load-in had begun at 8 that morning under Joe's supervision, and the room was 90% complete by the time I walked in. I spent the first hour doing a full technical review with the AV team and walking the program cues with the lighting designer. The stage program ran 1 hour and 40 minutes. I had rehearsed it twice with the MC, a man named Franklin Cole who had been hosting nonprofit galas in the Southeast for 15 years and was very good at the job, which means he was warm without being soft and funny without being distracting and could hold a room of 400 people with the same ease that some people hold a conversation. I reviewed the run of show with Franklin at 3 in the afternoon. We walked every cue, every transition, every timing beat. He asked 2 questions, both good ones. I answered them. He said, "We are going to have a good night." I said, "Yes, we are." By 5 o'clock the room was complete. I stood at the entrance and looked at it the way I always look at a finished room, not for problems anymore, but just to see what we had made. The ceiling was strung with warm light that graduated from amber at the perimeter to a brighter white above the stage, designed to draw the eye forward without the guests noticing they were being directed. The tables were dressed in ivory and deep blue, the foundation's colors, and the centerpieces were tall architectural arrangements of white florals and eucalyptus that gave the room height without closing it in. The stage was clean and confident. The lighting truss overhead was invisible the way good technical work is always invisible. The whole room felt like something was about to happen. That is the goal. The room should feel anticipatory before the first guest arrives. If it feels like a room, you have not done enough. If it feels like a world, you have done your job. I went to the production suite at 5:15 and changed. Black dress, structured, floor length. The kind of dress that says I belong in this room without asking anyone's permission. I fixed my earrings and looked at myself for 20 seconds and went back out. Guests began arriving at 6. I was at the registration desk for the first 15 minutes and then moved through the cocktail reception, doing the work that never shows on a run of show document. Watching, reading the room, checking in with service staff, confirming the catering timeline was tracking, making sure the string ensemble was reading the room's energy and adjusting their set accordingly. They were. Good musicians do that without being asked. I saw Eleanor arrive at 6:19. She came in with Colt and with Sylvia Crane and Sylvia's husband and 2 other couples I recognized from the board list. Eleanor was wearing a deep wine-colored dress and her signature pearls, the triple-strand ones she wore to every formal occasion, and she looked the way she always looked at events, composed and assured, and aware of exactly how she was presenting herself. She did not see me immediately. She was taking in the room. I watched her take it in. I saw her note the lighting, the florals, the stage. I saw her settle into the comfortable evaluation of someone who attends events like this regularly and knows what they are supposed to look like. I moved away before she could spot me. Not because I was avoiding her. because I had a room to run, and I was going to run it. 40 minutes into cocktail hour, I was near the back of the reception space, reviewing the catering timing with our service lead, when I heard Eleanor's voice behind me. Clear and social, the voice she uses with people she wants to impress. I did not turn around. I tracked the sound. She was standing with Sylvia and two other women about 10 feet to my left, and she was talking about the room. She said the room was beautiful. She said whoever had done the florals had done a wonderful job. She said it looked like a real production. Then Sylvia asked her something I could not fully hear. I heard Eleanor's response. She said, "Oh, Colt's wife does something adjacent to this. Venue work. I think she helps with setup for events like this. Housekeeping, really. Getting the rooms ready." She said it with a light laugh, the kind that signals the topic is mildly amusing and not worth investigating further. She said housekeeping. In the room I had designed and built, and spent 7 months putting together. She said housekeeping. I stood with my clipboard and my earpiece, and I did not turn around. I noted it the way you note a figure in a column that does not match. And I moved to the next item on my mental checklist, which was confirming the stage call time with Franklin. I want to tell you something, honestly. I was not surprised. That is the accurate word. I was not surprised. I had been watching Eleanor describe my work in diminished terms for 4 years, and this was another instance of the same thing. What landed differently this time was not the word she chose. It was the room she said it in. She said it in a room that I had built from a blank contract and a phone call in March. She said it in a room where my name was on every vendor agreement, every permit, every technical document. She said it surrounded by the work she was dismissing. And in 40 minutes, the program was going to start. I confirmed the stage call time with Franklin. He was ready. I confirmed with Petra that the door to the dining room would open at 7 on the. She confirmed. I checked in with Joe on the technical cues. Everything was green. I went to the production position at the back left of the room and stood next to Joe with my tablet and my earpiece, and I ran the dinner transition. 460 people moved from cocktail into the dining room in 11 minutes. Smooth, directed without feeling hurted, the way good event flow works when the spatial design has been done correctly. The room filled. The string ensemble transitioned to the background dinner set. The lighting shifted to the warmer, more intimate program tone. Service began. The room was humming. Franklin Cole took the stage at 7:42, 2 minutes ahead of schedule, which was intentional. We had built in buffer and used it to bring up the room's energy slightly before the formal program began. He opened with 3 minutes that were perfect, warm and specific and genuinely funny in a way that required him to know the room's history, which he did because I had given him a detailed briefing document, and he had read every word of it. The first portion of the program ran exactly to time. The Foundation's opening remarks. The first video package. The table conversations prompted by the evening's central question. I was watching from the back, tracking cues, monitoring the room's energy, watching the service team navigate the dinner plates around the program beats without disrupting either. This is the part of event production that requires the most simultaneous processing. You are running the room, watching the program, monitoring a dozen moving parts through an earpiece, and making real-time adjustments so small and so constant that to an outside observer nothing is happening at all. To you, everything is happening at once. At 8:17, Franklin returned to the stage for the midpoint of the program. He guided the room through the live auction setup, introduced 2 board members who spoke briefly, and then he paused. I saw the pause coming because I had scripted the pause. I knew what was next. Franklin looked down at his notes, and then looked up at the room, and he said something that was not in the run-of-show document. He said, "Before we continue, I want to take 30 seconds to acknowledge something." He said, "This room did not build itself." He said, "There is a version of a gala that feels like a room with some tables and a stage and some dinner. And then there is a night like this one, where you walk in and something is already present before a single word is spoken, and that presence is not an accident." He said, "That is craft. That is the specific, painstaking, invisible craft of production, and the person who brought that craft to this room tonight has been working toward this evening since April." He said her firm, Voss Event Group, is the reason this night is what it is. He said, Renata Voss is our executive director of production, and this room is hers. He looked out toward the back of the room. 460 people turned. I raised my hand once.
Steady.
Not a performance. Just an acknowledgement. The applause was full and sustained. Franklin let it run longer than I would have scripted it. He said, "Renata, thank you for building something we are going to remember." The room responded again. I lowered my hand. I looked at my tablet. I confirmed the next cue with Joe. The program continued. I did not look for Eleanor's table. Colt told me afterward what happened at table 7. He had been watching his mother from the moment Franklin said my name. He said she was talking to Sylvia Crane when the acknowledgement began, and she stopped mid-sentence. He said she looked at the stage, and then she looked toward the back of the room, and she found me. He said Sylvia turned to her and said, "Colt's wife is the director of this event." And Eleanor said yes. And Sylvia said she had been trying to identify who had produced the night because it was extraordinary. She said she had already decided she wanted to recommend the firm to 2 other foundations she was involved with. Colt said Eleanor did not speak again for several minutes. He said she sat very still. He said his father, Benton, who was a quiet man who mostly stayed inside his own thoughts at social events, started applauding immediately and kept going. Benton had always been kind to me in the particular way of people who show their feelings through gesture rather than language. He was clapping for me, and he was not subtle about it. Darcy, who was seated at a different table with her husband, texted Colt during the auction. The text said, "Mom's face right now." And then a second text that just said, "Worth it." The live auction raised $412,000 in 38 minutes. A foundation record. Clifton Hargrove shook my hand backstage during the transition to dessert and said, "This is the night we needed." I said I was glad. He said he wanted to talk about next year. I said, "Let us get through tonight first." He laughed. We talked about next year. Breakdown began at 10:45. I supervised the first hour and then handed off to Joe at midnight. I did not leave until 1:15 in the morning, when the venue was clear and every vendor had confirmed their departure, and the venue manager had walked the space and signed off. That is how you close a night. That is the last thing that happens that nobody sees. Eleanor found me at 9:30, just before the dessert service, in the corridor outside the production suite. She had clearly been looking for me. She was still composed, but it was a different kind of composed than the one she wore at cocktail hour. That one had been easy. This one had cost something. She said, "Renata." I said, "Eleanor. I have about 4 minutes before I need to be back at position." She said, "I know." She said she would be brief. She said she had been watching the evening happen, and she had been sitting with something since Franklin Cole said my name. She said she had been carrying a version of who she thought I was for 4 years, and that version was wrong. Not partially wrong.
Wrong.
She said she wanted me to know that she knew that. She said she had been describing my work to people in ways that she understood now were not fair, and that the room she was standing in made that very clear to her. I looked at her. Eleanor Voss was 61 years old, and she was not accustomed to saying things like this. I could see what it cost her. I respected that she was paying it. I said, "I appreciate you saying that to me directly." She said, "I want to understand what you actually do." She said, "Not because you just impressed a room of strangers. Because you have been my son's wife for 4 years, and I have not known you properly, and that is on me." I said, "Come to the office sometime. I will show you." She said she would. I went back to my position at 9:34. 4 minutes. I had given myself 4 minutes, and I had used them well. Colt and I talked in the car on the way home. Not right away. The first 20 minutes were quiet. He drove, and I sat with my eyes half closed, not sleeping, just letting the room leave me the way it always does after a major event, the slow depressurization of 7 months of work finally done. He reached over and put his hand over mine on the console. He said, "For the record, I always knew." I said, "I know you did." He said he was sorry he had not found a way to make her understand sooner. I told him it was not his job to make Eleanor see anything. I said, "Some things have to be witnessed. You cannot explain them in advance. You just have to let them happen in a room and trust that the room is doing the work." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The room did a lot of work tonight." I said yes. It did. Eleanor came to the office 3 weeks after the gala. She arrived on a Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, which was the time we had agreed on, and she was not a minute late. I respect punctuality in people. It tells you something about how they operate. Petra gave her coffee. I walked her through the office. The production boards on the walls with color-coded timeline markers, the vendor contact systems, the budget tracking structure, the post-event debrief documents from the Hargrove Gala still displayed on the main monitor. I walked her through the production timeline, start to finish, from the initial client call in March to the 1:15 breakdown sign-off in November. I explained what each phase required, and what could go wrong in each phase and how you build the contingencies before you need them. She listened the way she had not listened at any Sunday dinner in 4 years. She asked questions. Not deflecting questions, not questions designed to redirect the conversation somewhere more comfortable. Real questions. What happens when a vendor cancels close to the event? How do you build a budget that accounts for the costs the client does not know to ask about? What is the difference between a gala that raises $2 million and a gala that raises $400,000, and how much of that difference is the production itself? I answered every question. At the end, she looked at the Hargrove debrief summary on the monitor. Final revenue raised, $412,000, a 41% increase over the foundation's previous record. She read it and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You built that." I said, "My team and I built that." She nodded. She said, "I want you to know that I have been saying things about your work that were not accurate. I have been saying them to people who then formed impressions of you based on what I said. That was not right. I am going to correct it." I said I appreciated that. She said she meant it. And the thing about Eleanor Voss is that when she commits to something, she follows through, because she is nothing if not consistent. That is the same quality that had worked against me for 4 years and was now working in my direction. Darcy texted me that Saturday. She said she did not know what happened at the office, but Mom had called 3 different people she knew to tell them about my firm. She said Eleanor had described the Hargrove Gala in more accurate detail than I would have expected. She said the word she kept using was extraordinary. I showed the text to Colt. He read it and looked up and smiled the quiet smile he has when something has resolved into the shape it was supposed to be. What I want to tell you about Eleanor's office visit is the moment that mattered most to me, and it was not the apology. The apology was necessary, and she delivered it, and I received it, and that was its own important thing. But the moment that stayed with me was when she stood in front of the production board on the wall, the one with 7 months of timeline mapped in color-coded markers, every vendor, every milestone, every contingency pathway, and she was quiet for a long time.
Just looking at it.
Not asking questions yet, just looking. And I watched her take in the actual shape of the work, and I watched her understand, maybe for the first time, that what I did was not something you could walk into on a Saturday and figure out as you went. That it was a discipline. That it had structure and rigor, and required exactly the kind of brain she had probably assumed I did not have. She said, "This is how you think." It was not a question. It was recognition. I said yes. This is how I think. She nodded slowly and moved on to the next question, and I could see something recalibrating behind her eyes, and I thought, this is what it takes for some people. Not an argument. Not a correction at a dinner table. A wall full of evidence that speaks in a language they finally have the frame to read. Phyllis, the neighbor who had been told I did housekeeping for corporate clients, ran into Eleanor at their civic committee meeting in December and asked whether Colt's wife had been involved with the Hargrove Foundation Gala, because Phyllis's niece had attended and had not stopped talking about it for 2 weeks. Eleanor said yes. She said Renata's firm produced the entire event. She said she was extremely talented. Phyllis said she had no idea. Eleanor said she supposed she had not explained it properly before. She had not. She had not explained it properly before. But I noted that she explained it properly now, and I filed that too. The Hargrove Foundation renewed the contract for the following year in December. Clifton Hargrove called me personally. He said the board had voted unanimously. He said the foundation had received more positive feedback about the gala night itself, separate from the auction results, than in any previous year. He said people kept using the same word. He said they said the evening had felt intentional, like every piece of it was where it was supposed to be for a reason. I told him that was the goal. Every piece in its place for a reason. That is the whole job. Sylvia Crane called separately. She gave my name to 2 foundations she sat on the boards of. Both reached out in January. I took one of those meetings in February and walked out with a contract. The second meeting I scheduled for March. Sunday dinners changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. The way things change when they actually change rather than when you are pretending they have. Eleanor still ran her kitchen the same way and served her pot roast on the same schedule and organized her women's auxiliary luncheon every April with the same precision she always had. But the way she spoke to me was different. She asked me questions now. Real ones. Not how was the food at the last event, but what made the Hargrove seating arrangement different from what I had done in previous years, or whether the live auction format was always this effective or whether we had tested alternatives. She was genuinely curious. And I discovered that Eleanor Voss Curious was actually an interesting conversation partner, because she was sharp and she pushed back thoughtfully, and she had spent 60 years watching people operate in rooms, and she had observations that were not always wrong. It was not a transformation. It was a correction. She had been wrong and she adjusted. That is what people with integrity do when they have the courage for it. Eleanor had plenty of courage. She had just been spending it on the wrong position for 4 years. Benton, Colt's father, stopped me at Easter dinner the following spring. He pulled me aside before the meal, which was so out of character for him that I stopped walking immediately and turned to give him my full attention. He said, "I want to tell you something I probably should have said 3 years ago." He said he had known for a long time what I was building. He said Colt talked about the business the way men talk about things they are proud of, which is with a specific kind of care in the details, and Benton had been listening. He said he was sorry he had not said it out loud sooner. He said he was proud to have me in the family. Not proud of what I had done. Proud to have me. The way you say it about a person, rather than a performance. I thanked him. I meant it completely. He patted my arm and went back inside and poured himself a drink and did not bring it up again, which was exactly right and exactly Benton. Colt and I talked about all of it one evening in late spring, months after the gala, after the office visit, after the contract renewal and the new clients and the Sunday dinners that had started to feel different. We were sitting on our back porch, and it was warm, and the light was doing that late afternoon thing it does in May where everything looks like the last hour before something good happens. He asked me if I felt like things had resolved. I thought about it for a real minute before I answered. I said I felt like things had become accurate.
Which was different from resolved.
Resolved implied a conflict with 2 sides. This had not been a conflict. It had been a long misrepresentation that had now been corrected. The relationship with Eleanor was not repaired because it was not broken. It was adjusted. And adjusted was the right word because it left room for the truth of all of it, the 4 years of being diminished and the office visit, and the ongoing work of building something real between 2 people who had not actually known each other before. He said, "Adjusted is good." I said yes. It is. I have been in event production for 16 years. I have built rooms in 14 states. I have run nights that raised money for pediatric hospitals and cancer research and literacy programs and disaster relief. I have coordinated logistics for 2 people and for 2,000. I have worked with a team of 1, which was me alone in the first year, and a team of 14, which is what Voss Event Group runs now. My mother, who worked office cleaning in the mornings and hostess shifts 4 nights a week so I could finish school without carrying debt that would have taken a decade to clear, came to the Hargrove Gala the following year as my personal guest. She sat at table 4, which I had placed near the front because the sight lines from table 4 were the best in the room, and I had planned it that way 6 weeks before the event. She watched the room fill up with 400 people, and she sat straight and quiet during the program, and she cried without sound during the video about the children the foundation had helped, the ones who were alive and running and whole because a research program had existed and had been funded. Afterward, she held both my hands across the table and said, "You were always going to do something like this. I just did not know it would look like this." She never used the word housekeeping. She said the room was beautiful. And she was right.
It was.
We built it to be. Here is what 4 years of being misnamed in someone else's telling taught me. Being dismissed by someone is not evidence of your actual size. It is evidence of the size of the space they have made available to see you in. Eleanor Voss had a frame. The frame had a specific shape. I did not fit inside it, and so she reduced me to something that would fit rather than expanding the frame to hold what was actually there. This is not unique to Eleanor. This is what people do when they encounter something that does not match the story they're telling. The story is comfortable. The evidence is inconvenient. So the evidence gets shaved down. The answer is not to argue with the shaving. The answer is to keep building until the thing you have built is too large for any frame to contain. Until it fills a room so completely that a man at a microphone says your name to 460 people and every person in that room turns to find you standing at the back, where the work gets done. I did not stand at the back because I was hiding. I stood at the back because that is where I could see everything. That is where the whole room was visible and manageable, and mine. The people who needed to find me found me. Franklin Cole found me with a sentence. 460 strangers found me with their eyes. And Eleanor Voss, seated at table 7, found me the same way she had refused to find me for 4 years, through evidence she could not argue with, in a room she had walked into thinking one thing and walked out of knowing another. The work was always the answer. It just needed a room big enough to be witnessed. You do not have to explain yourself to people who are not ready to hear the explanation. You do not have to shrink yourself into the version of you that fits their frame. You build the thing. You check every cue. You walk every table the night before and lower the centerpieces 4 inches so the sight lines are right and nobody notices except you. You stay until the chairs are stacked and the venue manager signs off and the last truck has pulled out of the loading dock. And then you let the work be visible in a room where the right people are finally sitting still long enough to see it. That is the whole story. 4 years, 1 gala, 460 people, and a word that is not housekeeping. That is my story. If you have ever done real work and watched someone else name it in a way that had nothing to do with the truth, drop it in the comments. Tell me the version they told the room and the version that was real. I want to hear it. And if this story reminded you that no frame is big enough to contain actual work done with actual care over actual years, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of that today. Subscribe if you have not already. I will see you in the next one.